Imagine a kingdom where the snow never melts, and neither does the grief. A land ruled by a vampire king who once cherished Christmas, until the night his queen died and hope froze with her. 4 years, darkness swallowed every corner of his palace, until a human woman crossed the forbidden borders, carrying nothing but stubborn courage and a handful of light. But when she rekindled the warmth he buried long ago, something ancient woke in the shadows. Something hungry. Something powerful. Something that would destroy the kingdom just to extinguish her spark. This is the story of a king haunted by loss. A girl brave enough to challenge his curse. And the monster rising from the snow to end them both. Alright, before we start, where in the world are you watching this from? Let's light up the comments. Snow fell over the kingdom of Blackwell like it always had, silently, endlessly, and without ever melting. Each flake drifted down as if in slow motion, as though time itself resisted moving forward. The land was cursed with an eternal winter, and the people who lived there had long forgotten what warmth felt like. Fires in the hearth burned low, lanterns flickered weakly, and the sky remained a constant shade of cold gray. But the real chill came not from the climate, but from the grief that had swallowed the kingdom whole. For on the highest hill, standing dark against the pale sky, was the abandoned palace of King Rowan Blackwell, ruler of the vampire kingdom, once known for power, elegance, and terrifying beauty. But now the palace looked like the ghost of a dream. Frost clung to its massive stone pillars. Windows that once glowed with golden candlelight were black, their glass cracked with frozen tears. The enormous front doors, once opened every winter for grand celebrations, now stood shut, sealed with a decree known across the land. Christmas was banned. No carols. No lights. No gatherings. No joy. No reminders of the queen who once filled the palace with life. The decree came after the death of Queen Alara, the heart and warmth of the kingdom. The day she died, every bell in the land had gone silent. Every candle blew out. Every snowflake seemed to fall with heavier sorrow. And King Rowan, once charismatic, captivating, and feared even by his own kind, became a shadow of the man he once was. Inside the abandoned palace, Rowan walked the halls like a ghost. He wore a long black coat with silver clasps, and his boots made no sound on the frozen marble floor. His hair, dark as a raven's wing, hung loose around his sharp face. His eyes, once vibrant red with life, now looked dim, bleeding into a gray that matched the sky outside. He entered the throne room, where frost coated the armrests and icicles hung from the high ceiling. Pale moonlight cut across the floor, reflecting on the throne made of dark obsidian. He stared at it for a long moment. He didn't sit. He rarely did anymore. Instead, he turned and walked toward a smaller, circular room connected to the throne chamber. A place he visited every night. The Queen's chamber. The door creaked as he pushed it open. Inside, nothing had changed. Her books were still stacked on the wooden table. Her winter cloak still hung by the fireplace. A silver comb sat on her dresser where she had left it the night before she died. Rows of lit candles surrounded a portrait of her, a woman with gentle eyes, golden hair, and a smile that softened even the coldest hearts. Rowan stepped forward and touched the edge of the portrait frame. Cold. Just like his world. He closed his eyes. "I failed you," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "And I've failed the kingdom." A gust of wind blew through the cracked window. The flame on one candle flickered. Rowan didn't react. He stood still, like a statue carved from grief. Then a soldier knocked gently on the doorframe. "My king," the guard spoke carefully, as though Rowan were made of shattered glass. "The villagers are unrestful. They ask if the Christmas ban will be lifted this year." Rowan didn't turn. His voice remained low, emotionless. "No." "But sire." "No." Rowan's tone sharpened. "There will be no Christmas. There will be no lights. There will be no joy to mock what we have lost." The soldier lowered his head. "As you command." When the soldier left, Rowan exhaled quietly. He touched the Queen's comb, his thumb brushing over the smooth silver. "I cannot watch this kingdom celebrate while your chair remains empty," he murmured. Outside, snow continued to fall. Thicker, colder, darker. Christmas was forbidden. Hope was forbidden. And no one, not even the bravest, dared to defy the Vampire King. But that was about to change. Far beyond the frozen borders, someone had heard the kingdom's cries. Someone who wasn't afraid. Someone whose own heart carried scars of grief, yet still beat with stubborn hope. Her name was Grace Winslow, and she had no idea what waited for her beyond the endless snow. Grace Winslow pressed a hand to her chest as she looked up at the distant mountain range that marked the beginning of the Vampire Kingdom. The peaks were sharp like the teeth of a monster, and the sky above them twisted into a strange metallic gray. She tightened her wool scarf and whispered to herself, "Grace, you must be out of your mind." But she kept walking. Grace had traveled far, through human villages, through forests where even birds refused to sing, through blizzards that felt almost personal. She carried only a travel pack filled with Christmas ornaments, a few strings of lights, and a folded letter that had changed everything. The letter came from a frightened human trader who had escaped the Vampire Kingdom. He spoke of darkness, silence, and a ruler drowning in grief. He wrote, "No light is allowed. No music. The Vampire King has banned Christmas. We are all losing hope." Grace's heart broke reading it, because she knew what it meant to lose someone. She knew what it meant to wake up in a world that suddenly felt colder. Her own brother, who had loved Christmas more than anyone, had died 3 years ago. After that, her world dimmed. But she had not let the darkness swallow her. She had started planning celebrations again, first for her village, then for others, then for businesses and towns far away. Bringing back joy became her way of surviving. And now, it seemed, someone else needed it more than ever. Grace trudged through deep snow, her boots sinking into the powdery ground. Her breath fogged the air in front of her as she muttered, "If I can bring Christmas back to the Harrington family after their triple disaster, I can handle one Vampire King. Maybe." The wind answered her by slapping her face with frozen air. "Oh, come on," she groaned. Not even a warm breeze for encouragement. But she smiled despite herself. Grace's personality had a stubborn glow, like a candle that refused to be blown out. As she continued walking, the forest grew darker, and shadows stretched long across the path. "Hello," she called nervously. "Any friendly forest spirits? Reindeer? Snow angels?" No answer. Just silence. Then, a soft crunch behind her. Grace whipped around. "Who's there?" A tall figure stepped into view. Pale skin. Silver eyes. Wearing armor decorated with the insignia of the Blackwell Kingdom. A vampire soldier. He looked surprised to see her. Humans rarely traveled this far. "You," he said in a deep voice, "should not be here. This land is dangerous, especially for humans." Grace swallowed hard. "I'm aware. Very aware. Extremely aware. But I need to speak to your king." The soldier's brows lowered. "King Rowan does not receive visitors. Especially not humans." Grace exhaled slowly. "Look, I know he's grieving. I know the kingdom is suffering. I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm an event planner." The vampire blinked. "A what?" "An event planner." Grace repeated. "I organize celebrations, festivals, decorations. I bring joy to places that have lost it." The soldier stared blankly at her. Grace continued, slightly panicked, her words tumbling fast. "Someone wrote to me and said your kingdom has banned Christmas. And people are sad. And scared. And I can't let that happen. So I came to help bring back the celebration." The soldier looked at her like she had lost her mind. "You want to decorate the vampire palace?" "Yes." "In a land where Christmas is forbidden?" "Yes." "Where humans are hunted?" Grace forced a smile. "I'm very fast. Sometimes." The soldier let out a slow breath and shook his head. "I admire your bravery, human," he said quietly. "But it is wasted. The king will not let you near him." Grace's eyes softened. "Maybe. But someone has to try." She stepped forward. "Please. Just take me to the palace. If he refuses, I'll leave. I promise." The soldier lingered in silence. His silver eyes were unreadable. Then he finally said, "You are either brave or foolish." "Both," Grace admitted. "But mostly brave." The soldier sighed heavily and motioned for her to follow. As they walked, the forest thinned, revealing a grand silhouette in the distance, the Palace of Blackwell. It rose like a dark mountain, its towers piercing the sky. Snow clung to its walls, and the huge iron gates were covered in frost. Grace felt a shiver, not from the cold, but from the overwhelming sadness that seemed to radiate from the place. The soldier whispered, "This palace once glowed with warmth every winter. Now look." Grace stared at the dead windows, the lifeless walls, the ice-covered stone. "It looks like it's crying," she whispered. Inside the palace gates, more soldiers watched her with suspicion, their eyes glowing faintly. Grace kept her shoulders squared as they guided her through dark hallways that echoed with the howling wind. Finally, the soldier stopped before the throne room doors. Inside, King Rowan stood facing the frozen windows, his back turned. "Wait here," the soldier instructed. He stepped inside and bowed to the king. "My lord, a human woman requests audience." Rowan didn't move. "Send her away." Grace's heart hammered, but she burst through the doors anyway. "Please don't," she cried. The soldier gasped. "Human." Rowan turned sharply, his coat sweeping behind him. His eyes, cold, piercing, ancient, fell on Grace. The room froze even more. Even the flames in the torches seemed to shrink. Grace swallowed. "Hello," she said softly. Rowan stared at her, his expression unreadable. "A human," he said in a low voice. "Inside my palace. During the season I have forbidden." His tone darkened. "You must value your life very little." Grace lifted her chin. "I value hope more." A flicker, barely visible, crossed Rowan's eyes. She took a small step forward. "I'm Grace Winslow, and I'm here to bring Christmas back." The temperature seemed to drop instantly. Rowan's eyes turned stormy. "You dare speak that word in my presence?" Grace didn't back down. "Yes, because your kingdom needs it." He stepped toward her. Slowly, Grace could feel the ancient power in his movements. "And why?" Rowan murmured. "Do you think you understand what my kingdom needs?" Grace met his eyes. "Because I know what grief feels like. I know what it means to lose someone you love. And I also know that darkness gets worse when you shut out every light." Rowan stopped walking. Grace didn't blink. For a long, heavy moment, nothing moved. Not the torches. Not the snow outside. Not the air between them. Then Rowan spoke, voice quiet but sharp. "You know nothing of my grief." Grace answered just as softly, "Then let me help." Silence again. Finally, Rowan turned away. "You will leave at dawn." Grace's heart sank, but she didn't give up. "Give me one night," she said. "One chance. Let me look around the palace. You don't have to talk. You don't have to see me. Just let me try." Rowan paused. His shoulders stiffened. When he finally spoke, his voice held an emotion Grace couldn't identify. "One night," he whispered. "And then you leave." Grace nodded, her heart racing. She had just stepped into a kingdom swallowed by sorrow, and she was determined to bring back the light, even if the darkness fought her, even if the king himself stood in her way. Grace had never seen a palace so enormous, yet so silent. The moment Rowan left her with 2 guards outside the throne room, she was guided through dim hallways that stretched endlessly in every direction. The torches lining the walls flickered weakly, their flames blue instead of orange. The air tasted old, as if it had not been breathed by anyone living, or undead, in years. The guard escorting her kept glancing nervously at her, as if expecting her to run screaming at any moment. Grace didn't blame him. Every wall carried echoes. Every room felt like a memory trapped behind ice. Every step she took clicked loudly on the marble floor, the sound swallowed instantly by the heavy stillness. "This is beautiful," she whispered despite herself, eyes tracing the tall arched ceilings decorated with carvings of wolves, moons, and ancient symbols. The guard cleared his throat, startled. "Beautiful? Most humans call it terrifying." Grace shrugged. "It can be both." He didn't answer, but she saw his expression soften for a fraction of a second. They entered a long gallery filled with portraits. Grace slowed her steps, drawn in by the soft glow of candlelight reflecting off gold frames. The first portrait showed a young Rowan, before grief hollowed his eyes, standing proudly beside a woman with gentle golden hair. Grace paused. "That's the Queen, isn't it?" she asked quietly. The guard shifted uncomfortably. "Queen Ilara Blackwell." "Yes." Grace stepped closer. Ilara's smile was warm, softening the sharpness of Rowan's vampire features. They looked like opposites woven together, light and shadow, sun and night, and yet perfectly matched. "Was she human?" Grace asked. "No," the guard said. "But she brought warmth to the vampire kingdom like no immortal ever had. The king loved her deeply." Grace studied Ilara's eyes. There was kindness in them. A little sadness, too, as if even in the portrait she could foresee the loneliness that would follow her death. And the sorrow in Rowan's eyes. Back then they were full of life. Now they were dim. "What happened to her?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted the answer. The guard hesitated. "Her death is not to be spoken of. Not even by us." Grace nodded slowly. She understood enough. Something terrible had happened. And Rowan had never recovered. She looked at the next portraits, past kings, queens, battles, coronations. But one painting caught her breath, a grand ballroom filled with lights, greenery, red ribbons, and stars of gold, an unmistakable Christmas celebration. Hundreds of vampires danced and laughed. Even the king was smiling. Grace whispered, "So they did celebrate, once." "Yes," the guard said softly. "Because the queen insisted on it. She believed joy kept even immortal hearts alive." Grace stared at the painting a long time. Somewhere inside her chest, her own grief stirred. "She sounds like someone I would have loved," she murmured. The guard nodded. Everyone did. He turned away, gesturing for her to follow. "Come. There is more you should see." They walked deeper into the palace. The floors grew colder, the windows frostier, and the silence heavier. Finally they reached a massive hall, the grand ballroom itself. Grace gasped as she stepped inside. The room was huge. 100 chandeliers hung from the ceiling, though most of their crystals had turned dull. The marble floor was cracked with frost. The stage where musicians once played was covered in dust. But what struck Grace the most was the enormous Christmas tree still standing in the far corner, dead, brittle, and untouched since the Queen's last celebration. The guard noticed her staring. "That was Queen Ilara's final tree," he said. "The king ordered it never to be removed." Grace walked slowly toward it. She touched one of the branches. It crumbled into ash-like powder in her fingers. Her heart tightened. "She must have loved this holiday," Grace said quietly. She did. It was the only time the king allowed humans into the palace. She said humans carried a warmth that even vampires needed. Grace blinked away sudden emotion. She took a deep breath and stepped back, looking at the vast empty space around her. "Where is the king now?" she asked. "In his private chambers. He rarely leaves them except to visit the Queen's memorial." Grace touched her scarf, grounding herself. "Then I should get to work," she said. The guard blinked in shock. "Work?" "Yes," she said, lifting her pack with determination. "I'm here to bring the palace back to life, remember? I only have one night." The guard stared at her with wide eyes. "You cannot decorate an entire cursed palace in one night." Grace grinned. "Watch me." And so she began. She unpacked strands of lights, some dim from the cold, but Grace coaxed them on with patience. She set candles on windowsills, wiping the frost away so their glow could escape into the night. She dusted old garlands, hung ribbons on the staircase railings, and even replaced broken ornaments on the dead tree. Slowly, very slowly, the palace began to change. Not by much. Just little sparks. Little glimmers. But in a place that had been shut away in darkness for years, even a single light felt like a miracle. She was halfway through dusting a chandelier when a low voice echoed through the hall. "You are very bold." Grace jumped, nearly dropping the feather duster. King Rowan stood in the doorway, half-shadowed. His eyes glowed faintly red, catching the light she had just hung. Grace steadied herself. "Just doing my job." Rowan walked toward her, each step silent. He looked around the room, his expression unreadable. "I did not give you permission to change my palace." Grace met his gaze. "You gave me one night." His jaw tightened. "You misunderstand. That meant one night before you leave. Not one night to decorate." Grace shrugged lightly. "Then it's a good thing you weren't specific." The corner of Rowan's mouth twitched, as if he almost smiled. "Almost. You speak to your king with unusual confidence," he said. "And you speak to your guest with unusual coldness." He paused. Grace turned back to work, dusting the chandelier. She could feel Rowan watching her. After a moment, he asked quietly, "Why do you care whether Christmas returns to a kingdom that is not yours?" Grace lowered her cloth. "I told you. Because I know what grief does. It isolates you, freezes everything around you, makes you think joy is disrespectful to someone you lost." She turned and faced him. "But it's not. Joy is the only thing strong enough to remind us that love existed in the first place." Rowan's eyes flickered. Pain, anger, confusion, she couldn't tell. "You speak as if you have lost someone," he said. Grace looked down at the chandelier crystal in her hand. "I have." Silence stretched like frost between them. Rowan's voice softened, almost too quietly to hear. "Then you understand why I must ban this holiday." Grace looked up, her eyes steady. "I understand why you want to. Not why you need to." Rowan's expression tightened. "You presume much, Miss Winslow. And you hide much, King Rowan." His eyes sharpened. Grace didn't back down. At last, Rowan exhaled, slow, long, almost weary. "Do what you wish for tonight," he murmured. "But do not expect this place to welcome your lights." Grace smiled gently. "Then I'll coax it back, little by little." Rowan said nothing more. He turned and left, his cape sweeping behind him like a shadow. Grace watched him go, her heart beating fast. She wasn't afraid. Not anymore. She felt something else instead. Sadness, for the man who carried too much pain. And determination, to bring back every spark of light this palace had lost. She continued decorating until the moon rose high. The palace didn't feel alive yet. But it felt like it was breathing again. And that was a start. Dawn crept slowly over the kingdom, but the sun never truly broke through the clouds. It only cast a faint glow, barely brighter than the moonlight before it. The eternal winter smothered every hint of warmth. Grace woke early, brushing frost from her hair. She had fallen asleep on a velvet couch in the ballroom, surrounded by boxes of decorations. Her neck ached, and her fingers were stiff, but she didn't care. Today, she would bring the palace to life. Again. Grace stretched, rubbed her eyes, and walked toward the hallway she hadn't entered yet. Along the way, she passed windows that still leaked cold air, and hallways that whispered with memories. But now, there was something else. She saw candles she had lit last night still burning. She saw little dust-free patches. She saw ornaments she'd hung swaying gently with the draft. Tiny signs of change. Tiny signs of hope. Grace smiled to herself. But then she noticed something that made her stop. The palace seemed to be resisting. Every candle she passed flickered strangely. Some lights she'd strung along the wall had dimmed. A ribbon she tied to a railing had somehow come undone. It felt as if the palace itself was fighting the joy she was trying to bring. Grace whispered, "Rowan wasn't exaggerating. This place really is full of sorrow." Still, she didn't stop. She pushed deeper into the palace. She entered the music hall, a long room with a dusty piano and shattered violins hanging on the wall. Grace approached the piano, brushing her fingers over the keys. A soft, broken note escaped. She winced. "Poor thing. You've been lonely too, huh?" She began cleaning the piano, humming a tune her brother used to love. The same tune she had played at his memorial. Her voice was soft, but it filled the room. A shadow moved in the doorway. Grace turned. Rowan stood there again, this time silently, watching her. His face was unreadable. "You sing," he said. Grace nodded. "Sometimes. You sound human." She laughed lightly. "That would make sense, considering I am." He didn't smile, but she saw a small shift in his eyes, something like curiosity. She patted the piano. "Does anyone play any more?" "No," Rowan said. "Not since her." Grace nodded softly. Rowan stepped farther into the room, his gaze drifting across the instruments. This hall used to be filled with music. Ilara played every morning. She said melodies kept the darkness out. Grace swallowed. "She sounds like she was light incarnate." She was. Rowan's voice cracked, not loudly, but enough that Grace heard it. He turned away as if embarrassed. Grace approached him slowly. "I can't replace her, but I can help restore the things she loved." Rowan's jaw clenched. "You cannot restore what is dead," he said coldly. Grace didn't flinch. "But I can remind you that life still exists around it." Their eyes met. For the first time. Rowan didn't look away. He stepped closer. His presence was overwhelming, cold, ancient, yet strangely fragile beneath the surface. "You are persistent, Miss Winslow." "Very. And reckless. Extremely." Rowan exhaled through his nose, almost a laugh, almost a sigh. "Your decorations, they awaken old magic," he said. "Magic that has slept since Ilara died. Some of it is gentle. Some of it is not." Grace frowned. "What do you mean?" Rowan's eyes darkened. "You may be bringing back light, but light also reveals shadows." Grace felt a chill run down her spine. Still, she lifted her chin. "Then I'll deal with the shadows too." Rowan stared at her for a long moment. "You speak like someone who has lost everything and fears nothing," he murmured. Grace looked down. "I fear plenty. I just don't let it stop me." Silence again, thick, emotional, but not uncomfortable this time. Finally, Rowan said, "Follow me." He led her through a corridor she hadn't seen before. They reached a large balcony overlooking the kingdom. Snow fell heavily, blanketing everything in white. Rowan stood at the railing, staring across the land. "When Ilara lived," he said softly, "this balcony glowed with lights every winter. Humans and vampires alike would gather below to watch the ceremony." Grace imagined it. Laughter, warmth, music rising into the cold air. Rowan's voice lowered. "Now it is dead. Like the season itself." Grace stepped beside him. "It doesn't have to stay dead." She opened her pack and pulled out a strand of golden lights. Rowan raised an eyebrow. "What are you doing?" "Fixing it." She began wrapping the railing with lights. Rowan watched in silence, his expression softening despite himself. When Grace finished, she pressed a switch. The lights flickered. Flickered again. And they glowed. Warm, golden, bright. And for the first time in years, the balcony shone. Rowan stared, stunned. Grace smiled gently. "See? Not dead. Just waiting." Rowan's voice was barely a whisper. "Ilara would have loved this." Grace touched the railing lightly. Then let her spirit enjoy it. A soft wind brushed past them, almost warm. Rowan closed his eyes, breathing it in. Grace didn't speak. She let him have the moment. Then Rowan opened his eyes, looked at her, and said, "Very well, Miss Winslow. You may continue your work." Grace grinned. "I intended to." But as she turned back to the palace, she paused. Far in the distance, across the snowy forest, something shifted. A shadow. A rustle in the ancient frost. A presence awakening. Grace didn't notice. But Rowan did. And the hope she brought had stirred something dangerous. Something that wanted darkness to return. The palace felt different the next morning. Grace moved through the halls with a sense of quiet purpose, her boots crunching softly over thin layers of frost. The decorations she had placed the previous day still flickered silently, glowing against the vast darkness of the palace interior. Even though the lights were faint, as if the palace itself fought against them, they were present. And that meant something. Grace ran her fingers along the stone walls as she walked. "Just a little more light," she whispered to herself. "Not too much. Just enough." She entered the main hall where she had left a cluster of candles the night before. Half of them had burned down, some extinguished by drafts, but a few remained warm and alive. Grace knelt beside one of them, adjusting the wick gently. "You're doing great," she said softly, smiling at a candle as if it were a stubborn child. "I know it's cold. But hang in there." As she worked, she heard soft footsteps behind her. She did not turn immediately. She already knew who it was. King Rowan's voice drifted to her, quiet and unreadable. "You speak to candles." Grace shrugged. "They listen better than most people." Rowan stepped into the hall, the dim light from her candles casting shadows across his sharp features. To Grace's surprise, he looked less cold today. Not warmer, exactly, just not frozen solid. His eyes scanned the small pool of light she'd created. "You have changed more of the palace in one day than I have allowed in years," he said. Grace smiled without looking at him. "Because you weren't allowing it for the right reasons." Rowan's jaw tightened. "The reasons are mine." "Grief isn't a reason," Grace said softly. "It's a cage." The air grew still. Rowan stared at her with something like shock, and something like anger. But beneath it all was a deeper emotion she recognized immediately. Pain. He walked past her, toward a tall window, pushing aside a curtain stiff with ice. Snow fell heavily beyond the glass, swirling like ash in the wind. "You presume too much," Rowan murmured. "I don't presume," Grace replied, standing up and brushing frost from her coat. "I understand." Rowan turned slightly toward her. "You understand nothing of what I lost." Grace stepped closer, not invading his space, but close enough for him to feel her presence. "You lost your queen," she said quietly. "I lost my brother." Rowan blinked. For a moment, the entire hall seemed to fall silent. Grace continued in a soft voice. "He loved Christmas. Every year he would stay up all night decorating our house. After he died, everything felt dark. I wanted to hide from the holiday. From music. From lights. From memories." Rowan's gaze lowered. "So why did you not?" he asked. "Because darkness felt worse than the memory," Grace whispered. "Because hiding didn't make the pain smaller. It made it larger." Rowan stared at the snow outside, his eyes shadowed. "Pain," he murmured, "is the only thing I know how to hold now." Grace exhaled gently. "Then let me help you carry it, even if only for a moment." He didn't answer. But he didn't move away either. And that was new. After a long silence, Rowan spoke, voice barely audible. "I have not stood in this hall since she died." Grace looked around the vast room. It was magnificent. High ceilings painted with stars, tall marble columns etched with scenes of ancient winters, chandeliers that once sparkled with silver light. And yet everything was frozen, dead. "Did she love this room?" Grace asked. Rowan nodded once. "She called it the heart of winter. She believed beauty could exist even in cold places." Grace smiled. "She sounds like someone who believed in impossible things." Rowan's lips twitched slightly. She believed in me. Grace looked at him carefully. Do you still believe in yourself? He didn't respond. But his silence was an answer. Grace stepped past him and examined a tall bookshelf covered in frost. She brushed dust from a row of books. Some covers were cracked. Some pages had fused together. Did she read these? Grace asked. Yes, Rowan said. She collected stories from human lands. My advisors thought it beneath a queen. She ignored them. Grace ran her thumb gently along the leather spine of a book. I have a feeling she ignored a lot of rules. She did. Rowan's voice softened. She made her own. Grace turned and met his eyes. Then let me make one more. Rowan raised a brow slightly. And what would that be? Grace spread her arms, looking at the empty hall. We bring back Christmas. At least in this room. Rowan inhaled sharply. The idea hit him like a physical blow. No, he said immediately. That room, this season, those memories, cannot return. Why? Grace asked quietly. Because you're afraid they'll hurt? Rowan's eyes flashed red. Because they already do. Grace held his gaze. Because she knew. Because she understood. Because pain was pain, no matter how ancient or immortal. Let the room hurt then, she said gently. Let it ache. It means it remembers what joy felt like. Rowan looked away. Grace stepped closer. I'm not trying to erase your loss, she whispered. I'm trying to honor it. Rowan exhaled, a long, breaking breath. His voice trembled for the first time. I do not know if I can watch you bring back what I lost. Grace reached toward him, not touching but offering. Then don't watch, she said softly. Just let me do it. He closed his eyes. And after a long, aching silence. One room, Rowan whispered. Only this one. Grace smiled, a small, gentle smile. That's all I need. But neither of them noticed the slight tremor beneath the floor, or the faint ripple in the air, or the whisper of magic awakening in the shadows above the chandeliers. Because the palace was waking up, and so was something else. Night fell quickly over the kingdom. Too quickly. Grace had spent the entire day decorating the heart of Winter Hall. She lit candles, adjusted garlands, polished cracked glass, and placed faint strands of gold light across the balcony doors. Rowan had disappeared at some point, saying he needed to think. She assumed he meant brood alone, but she didn't say that. By the time she finished, her hands were numb and her breath visible in the air. She stepped back and looked around. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't bright. It wasn't even fully warm. But it was alive. The hall glowed in soft amber light. Candles flickered on marble walls. Ornaments glimmered faintly on the dusty chandelier. The decorations were humble compared to what Grace usually created. But in this cursed palace, it looked magical. Grace whispered to herself, "There." Something she would have loved. But her smile faded when she heard the wind howl outside, louder than usual, almost like a cry. The candles flickered violently. Grace frowned. Okay, that's strange. A sudden chill swept across the hall. Not the normal cold of the palace. Something deeper, sharper, older. Grace rubbed her arms. Rowan. No answer. She moved toward the tall doors and pushed them open. A blast of icy wind hit her face. She stepped onto the balcony, her breath fogging instantly. The kingdom sprawled below her, dark, silent, endless. But something felt wrong. The air was heavier. The snow fell faster. The shadows seemed thicker. A faint crunch sounded behind her. Grace spun around. Nobody there. Okay. No panic, she whispered. Shadows are normal. Strange noises are normal. Creepy cursed palaces are normal. The crunch sounded again, this time from the garden far below. She leaned over the edge. At first she saw nothing but swirling snow. Then movement. A figure. Tall. Slow. walking through the white powder, leaving streaks of dark red behind. Footsteps filled with blood. Grace's breath caught. "Rowan!" she called, voice cracking. No answer. She backed away from the balcony edge and rushed back inside. She slammed the doors shut, her heart thundering. She pressed her ear against the wood. Nothing. Silence. Heavy. Hungry. Wrong. She turned away and screamed. Rowan stood right behind her. She stumbled backward. "You scared me." Rowan's eyes were narrowed, his chest rising with sharp breaths. "You felt it too," he said. Not a question, an observation. Grace nodded quickly, still shaken. "Something's out there. Someone." Rowan's face hardened, shadows cutting across his cheekbones. For the first time, Grace saw true fear in his eyes. Not for himself. For the kingdom. "We stirred old magic," Rowan said. "I feared this might happen." Grace swallowed. "What kind of magic?" "Magic," Rowan whispered. "That keeps things sleeping. Things that must never wake." Grace felt her skin prickle. "And something woke?" Rowan closed his eyes. "Something ancient," Grace whispered. "Who?" When Rowan opened his eyes again, they glowed bright crimson. Adrian Nightfall. The name itself felt like a chill wind. Grace didn't know the man or the creature, but she knew that Rowan's tone meant the worst kind of danger. "He was once my mentor," Rowan said quietly, "and later my greatest enemy." Grace's pulse raced. "Is he after you?" "No," Rowan said. He stepped toward her. "He is after you." Grace froze. "Me? Why, I didn't do anything." "You brought back light," Rowan said. "You brought warmth. You awakened memories that had been sealed." Grace's voice trembled. "Rowan, who is he?" Rowan looked away, as if saying it out loud would give the name power. "He is the darkness," Rowan whispered. "He is the blood moon. He is the winter that hungers." Grace's stomach twisted. "And he is coming." A loud, echoing crack sounded from somewhere deep within the palace. Grace jumped. "What was that?" Rowan grabbed her arm, not roughly, but urgently. "We must move," he said. "Now." Another crack. Closer. Rowan pulled her into the hall. "What does he want?" Grace demanded, heart pounding. Rowan didn't look at her. "He wants the kingdom back," Rowan said darkly. "He wants the throne. He wants chaos." He pulled her faster. "And he wants to destroy the one thing that threatens him." Grace whispered, "Christmas." "No," Rowan looked at her with eyes full of storm. "You." A final crack tore through the palace, this one shaking the chandeliers overhead. And Grace knew. Something was coming. Something ancient. Something powerful. And the light she brought back was the very thing that had woken the monster. The palace did not sleep. Not that night. Not anymore. The moment Rowan spoke Adrian Nightfall's name, the atmosphere inside the ancient building shifted. The air tightened. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the floors and pooled in corners where light could not reach. Grace followed Rowan through the twisting halls, her breath fast and shallow. She clutched the strap of her bag as if it could protect her from whatever lurked in the darkness. "Rowan," she whispered as they moved quickly, "what exactly is Adrian? A vampire like you." Rowan didn't slow. "He is older. Much older. From a time when vampires were not rulers, but predators." Grace swallowed. "So, a monster." "Yes," Rowan said. "A monster with intelligence. And purpose." They reached a staircase, but Rowan halted abruptly. His eyes narrowed. Grace noticed the frost coating the railing, melting. But not from warmth. From heat. Rowan touched the railing with 2 fingers. A faint hiss of steam rose where his skin met the metal. Grace's voice trembled. "That's not normal, is it?" "No," Rowan said. "Adrian absorbs cold. He devours it. The more cold he takes, the stronger he becomes. Grace blinked. But the whole kingdom is. Yes, Rowan said darkly. An endless feast. A loud thump echoed from somewhere above. Then another. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Grace froze. Is that him? No, Rowan said. He does not reveal himself so easily. That sound is something he sent. Sent. Grace whispered. As in. Yes, Rowan said. A warning. They pushed forward. Grace's heartbeat thundered in her ears, but she kept going. She had come here to bring light, not run from darkness. Suddenly, the hallway ahead flickered, lights dimming, brightening, then blacking out completely. The candles went out in perfect unison. Darkness swallowed everything. Grace gasped. Rowan. Stay behind me, Rowan commanded, voice suddenly sharp. She felt his arm guide her until her back touched the wall. She stayed still, senses straining. A faint scraping sound traveled across the ceiling. Slow at first, then quicker, then slow again, almost playful. Grace clenched her teeth. I don't like that sound. Rowan's voice was low, controlled. Do not fear the sound. Fear the silence after it. The scraping stopped. Everything went still. Grace whispered, That's worse. Rowan stepped forward, his red eyes beginning to glow faintly in the dark. They cast an eerie light across the corridor, enough for Grace to make out vague shapes but not enough for comfort. A face appeared in the darkness above them. Grace choked on her own breath. It clung to the ceiling like a spider, limbs twisted and elongated, eyes glowing an unnatural white. Its mouth stretched open in a wide, silent scream. Rowan moved faster than Grace could blink. He grabbed her arm and pulled her with such force that the wind itself felt ripped from her lungs. The creature dropped from the ceiling, landing exactly where Grace had been standing. A sharp crack echoed as its limbs hit the marble floor. It rose slowly, joints bending the wrong way. Grace's stomach twisted. What is that? An echo, Rowan said. A piece of Adrian's shadow. The creature lunged. Rowan threw Grace aside, then met the creature mid-air with a blast of icy power from his palm. Frost exploded across the hallway, covering the creature in a thick sheet of ice. It screeched, a piercing, bone-chilling sound, then shattered into hundreds of shards. Grace scrambled to her feet, panting. Tell me that was the only one. Rowan shook his head. They travel in groups of 3. Grace felt her blood run cold. 3. 2 more shadows crawled from the far ends of the corridor. Grace clutched her bag. Okay. Not panicking. Not. She exhaled sharply. Okay, maybe I'm panicking a little. Rowan grabbed her hand. Come. They ran. Through halls that seemed longer than before. Through staircases where frost turned into steam. Through rooms that echoed with distant whispers that could not be human. At last they reached a heavy wooden door. Rowan shoved it open, closing it behind them. Grace collapsed against a table, gasping. Rowan watched her for a moment, expression unreadable. You should not be here, he said quietly. Grace looked up at him. I know. But I came anyway. Why? Rowan demanded, his voice cracking with something like controlled desperation. Why risk your life for a kingdom that does not belong to you? Grace steadied herself. Because you needed help. Because this place needed hope. Because... The window beside them rattled violently. A shadow passed outside. Grace jumped. Rowan pulled her away from the window, positioning himself between her and the darkness. Adrian Hunt's weakness, Rowan whispered. He will test you. He will try to break you. Grace whispered back, he won't. Rowan turned his head slightly, eyes fixed on her face. I will not let him, he said quietly. Her breath caught, not in fear, but in something she couldn't name. Rowan stepped away before she could speak, his voice steady again. We must prepare. He will not wait long. Grace nodded. Then tell me what to do. A faint scratch crawled down the outside of the window. Rowan ignored it. Tomorrow, he said, we bring light back to the palace fully. Grace swallowed. Won't that make Adrian even angrier? Yes, Rowan said. Which is why we must be ready. Grace nodded tightly. Then I'll help. Whatever it takes. Rowan stared at her for a long moment, then nodded back. Outside, the shadow at the window formed a fist and struck the glass. A fracture spread across it like a white lightning bolt. It would not be long now. The next night arrived with thick, smothering darkness. Grace stood in the center of the heart of Winter Hall, surrounded by flickering candles. She adjusted the final ribbon on the reconstructed tree, a smaller one this time, but decorated with everything she had managed to find. Red berries. Small silver ornaments. Handmade stars she crafted from paper scraps. It was beautiful in an imperfect, gentle, fragile way. Grace exhaled softly. Please work, she whispered. Rowan entered the hall in silence. He wore a dark cloak embroidered with ancient symbols, and his hair was tied back, exposing the full sharpness of his features. You have done more than I expected, he said quietly. Grace smiled. You said one room. I made it the best I could. Rowan's eyes drifted to the glowing tree. A subtle emotion flickered across his face, something soft, something nostalgic, something painful and healing all at once. She would have loved this, he said. Grace nodded. I hope so. They stood in silence for a moment, both gazing at the tree. Then Grace reached into her bag and pulled out a small object wrapped in fabric. What is that? Rowan asked. A star, Grace said softly. For the top. She unfolded the fabric. Inside was a delicate golden star, a little dented, a little crooked, but shimmering. I made it last night, she explained. I thought, maybe you could put it on. Rowan stared at the star for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Grace held it out. Rowan hesitated. Shadows crossed his face. His hand shook, just barely. Grace whispered, It's okay. Finally, Rowan took the star. He approached the tree slowly, almost reverently. He lifted the star and placed it at the top. It glowed immediately, brighter than any light Grace had lit in the palace so far. Brighter than any candle. Brighter than any memory that had survived the years of sorrow. The hall filled with warm, golden light. Rowan stepped back, breath caught in his chest. Grace whispered, It's beautiful. Rowan's voice was barely audible. It is. Suddenly, the palace trembled. The candles flickered violently. Ornaments rattled. The golden star pulsed with energy. Grace's heart jumped. What's happening? Rowan's expression hardened. The magic awakened. A violent gust of wind blasted through the hall, extinguishing half the candles. Grace shielded her face from the swirling snow that burst through cracks in the windows. A deep, rumbling voice echoed across the room. Rowan Blackwell. Grace froze. Rowan stiffened. The voice laughed, a hollow, chilling sound. Do you think you can bring back her light? The torches along the walls burst into black flame. Grace backed up against the tree. Rowan. Rowan stepped in front of her, his power crackling around him. Show yourself, Rowan commanded, voice cold and lethal. The shadows swirled into a tall, slender figure. A man, if he could still be called one, stepped from the darkness. His long black coat was lined with crimson, his hair silver like moonlit frost, and his eyes glowed white with ancient hunger. Adrian Nightfall. He smiled, a terrible, elegant smile. Ah, Adrian said softly, looking at the glowing decorations. The little human brings light to your broken heart. His gaze slid to Grace. And she shines so brightly. Grace felt her blood turn to ice. Rowan moved protectively in front of her. Touch her and you die. Adrian chuckled. Oh, Rowan. Still claiming what you cannot protect. Grace whispered, Rowan. Rowan didn't take his eyes off Adrian. Stay behind me. Adrian tilted his head. "Do you know what you've awakened, child?" he asked Grace. She swallowed. "Hope." Adrian smiled. "Hope," he repeated mockingly. "The sweetest lie." He raised a hand. The golden star on the tree flickered, then dimmed. Grace gasped. Rowan unleashed a blast of icy power, frost exploding across the hall, but Adrian dissolved into shadows before it hit. He reappeared behind them. Grace yelped. Rowan spun, grabbing her arm and pulling her away from Adrian's grasp. Adrian laughed. "She has spirit, Rowan. Much like Ilara did." Rowan's face darkened with lethal rage. "Do not speak her name." "Why?" Adrian asked, stepping closer. "Because she chose you. Chose the weak one." Rowan attacked, light and frost swirling around him, but Adrian blocked the strike effortlessly with a single hand. Grace watched, horrified. Rowan was strong, but Adrian was something else. Ancient, untouchable, hungry. Adrian smirked. "You cannot win, Rowan. You never could." He looked at Grace again. "But she is the key. The spark. The one who broke your curse." Grace whispered. "Rowan, he wants to destroy Christmas." "Not Christmas," Adrian said softly. "Your hope. Your light. The reminder of what Rowan failed to protect." Rowan roared, lunging at him again. Adrian vanished. The hall shook violently. The floor cracked beneath Grace's feet. She stumbled, catching herself on a garland. "Rowan!" she cried. Adrian's voice echoed from everywhere. "I will return," he whispered. "And this time, I will take everything." The torches extinguished. The candles died. The golden star dimmed to a faint ember. Rowan caught Grace just before she fell. The hall went silent, cold, dark, wounded. Adrian had vanished, but his presence lingered like poison in the air. Grace looked up at Rowan, breath shaking. "What do we do now?" she whispered. Rowan's eyes glowed faintly, filled with a quiet fury. "We prepare," he said, "because he will be back, and next time he will not come alone." The golden star flickered softly, as if refusing to die, and Grace, trembling in Rowan's arms, whispered back, "Then so will we." The night after Adrian's appearance was the coldest the kingdom had ever seen. Not normal cold. Not the quiet winter freeze the palace had endured for centuries. This cold was sharp, alive, violent, like claws scraping across the sky. Grace woke with a gasp, sitting upright on the small couch Rowan had brought into one of the safer rooms. Her breath clouded the air in large, white puffs. Her blanket had frozen at the edges, stiff like thin sheets of ice. A deep rumble echoed far in the distance, like thunder trapped underground. Grace rubbed her eyes. Not again. She stood, wrapped the blanket around her, and opened the door cautiously. The hallway outside looked darker than usual. The wall torches had gone out during the night. Thin cracks of frost crawled across the stone like veins. Then she saw Rowan. He stood at the far end of the corridor, facing one of the tall windows. His cloak was wrapped tightly around him. His posture looked heavy, too heavy. Grace approached quietly. When she reached him, she realized the window was covered in thick ice from the outside. She placed her hand gently on Rowan's arm. "Did he come back?" Rowan didn't look at her. Not in body. But his presence is suffocating the kingdom. The more fear he spreads, the stronger he becomes. Grace stared at the ice coating the window. She could barely see the outside world now, just faint swirls of white. "Rowan," she whispered, "what happened out there?" He exhaled slowly. "The snow has turned red." Grace stiffened. "Red? Like blood?" Rowan nodded slightly. "Adrian is feeding on the life of the land. Every falling snowflake is mixed with energy he steals from the frozen earth, the dead trees, the wind, even the shadows." Grace shuddered. "Why now? Why so fast?" "Because your Christmas light awakened the heart of the palace," Rowan said quietly. And Adrian wants to rip it out. Grace clenched her jaw. He wants to destroy everything I've done. No, Rowan corrected. He wants to destroy what it awakened in me. Grace looked up at him. Rowan avoided her eyes, but that avoidance said everything. Rowan, she said softly, are you afraid? Rowan closed his eyes. I am afraid of losing again. Grace's heart tightened. For a moment she didn't speak. Then she said gently, You're not alone this time. But Rowan shook his head. You do not understand. If Adrian kills me, the kingdom falls. If he kills you, I fall. Grace said nothing. She didn't need to. Rowan turned toward her, his expression suddenly sharp. Grace, you must leave the palace. Grace blinked. No. This is not a debate. Rowan's voice lowered, firm but trembling. Adrian will focus on you. He knows hurting you hurts me. Grace took a step toward him. Then let him come. Rowan grabbed her shoulders, his hands cold but steady. Do not say that. The seriousness in his voice made her breath stop. You don't understand, Rowan said quietly. Adrian is not simply a threat. He is death itself. If he touches you... Grace cut him off. I'm not leaving. Rowan stared at her, frustrated and aching. Grace. You don't get to push me away because you're scared, she said strongly. I'm not leaving you to face him alone. I won't do that. Rowan's expression fractured for a moment. The palace trembled violently. Grace stumbled, but Rowan grabbed her before she fell. What was that? She gasped. Rowan looked toward the ceiling with fury in his eyes. He summoned the storm of crimson. Grace blinked. That sounds awful. It is, Rowan said darkly. A storm that feeds on fear. It targets whatever glows brightest. Grace's breath caught. The tree. Rowan nodded grimly. Yes. The heart of winter is the epicenter of the storm. Grace took off running. Grace. Rowan shouted, chasing after her. Wait. But she didn't listen. She ran through the hallways, her feet barely hitting the floor before she sprinted farther. Snow appeared inside the palace, falling from cracks in the ceiling. The air grew thick and metallic. With every corridor she passed, the snowfall darkened from white to pink to deep crimson. Please don't let it be destroyed, she whispered, breath shaking. A loud crack thundered from the direction of the heart of winter. Then another. Grace pushed harder, ignoring the burning ache in her legs. As she rounded the final corner, her heart broke. The room burned with red snow. The tree flickered desperately. Ornaments shook violently. The golden star dimmed to a weak, trembling glow. Grace gasped. No, 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 no. Rowan reached her, grabbing her arm. Grace, stay back. But flames of crimson were bursting from the ceiling, shattering the marble floor. The decorations trembled as if being torn apart by an invisible force. Adrian's voice filled the hall like a scream wrapped in silk. Your hope means nothing. Grace's legs shook. But she stepped forward anyway. Rowan hissed. Grace. She ignored him and approached the tree. Please, she whispered to the golden star. Just hold on. Another crack shot across the ceiling. Snow poured into the room like a waterfall, red and thick. It splashed onto Grace's boots, staining the floor. Rowan grabbed her wrist again, but froze when he saw something. Grace's hand began to glow. He whispered, What? Grace didn't notice. She touched the golden star gently, and the star pulsed with a strong burst of light. The storm's howling paused, just for a moment. But that moment mattered. The star brightened, sending a wave of warmth through the hall. The red snow evaporated where the light touched it. Grace's voice trembled. You're not dying tonight. Rowan stepped closer, eyes wide. Grace, you have magic. Grace shook her head. I'm human. Yes, Rowan whispered. But you carry light, the one force Adrian cannot devour. The star pulsed again, stronger this time. The red storm recoiled violently. Grace steadied her breath. We're fighting back, Rowan. All of us. The tree flickered, then roared to life with golden light. The storm screamed. The windows shattered outward. The red snow dissolved into sparks. Adrian's voice echoed in enraged fury. You dare defy me? Grace looked up at the ceiling, face pale but determined. You bet I do. The tree's light burst outward, filling the hall with blazing gold. The storm shattered completely. Silence fell. Not peaceful silence. The silence before something worse. Rowan stood beside Grace, eyes glowing crimson. He's coming, Rowan said. For real this time. Grace didn't look away from the glowing star. Then we'll be ready. The next evening felt wrong from the moment it began. The snow outside had stopped falling, but only because it was no longer snow. It was ash. Thick, gray flakes drifting down from a blackened sky. Grace and Rowan stood near the tall palace doors. Between them stretched a long, cold silence. Rowan was tense. Too tense. Grace finally said softly, "What are you thinking?" Rowan didn't look at her. "That this may be my last night." Grace frowned sharply. "Don't say that. It is the truth." "It doesn't matter," Grace snapped. "Truth or not, don't say it." Rowan finally met her eyes. For a moment, he looked like a man, not a king, not a vampire, not a warrior, but a man who had lost too much and feared losing more. He reached for her hand. Grace froze, but didn't pull away. Rowan whispered, "I am sorry." "For what?" "For bringing you here. For letting you walk into my darkness. For giving Adrian a reason to hurt you." Grace squeezed his fingers. "Rowan, stop apologizing. I chose to stay." "But you should not have." "Well, I did," she said stubbornly. "And I'll keep choosing it." Rowan looked away, jaw trembling slightly. "I do not deserve that." Grace stepped closer. "Deserving doesn't matter." He closed his eyes. For the first time, Grace saw him shake. A loud boom thundered through the palace doors. Grace flinched. Rowan spun around, cloak swirling around him. Another boom. The doors shook. "Grace," Rowan said sharply, "stay behind me." The doors cracked open a fraction. A sliver of darkness seeped through. Not shadows. Darker. Alive. Rowan pushed Grace backward. "Go to the heart of winter. Guard the tree." Grace grabbed his arm. "No, I'm staying with you." Rowan's voice cracked like ice. "Grace, go." The palace door exploded inward. Adrian stepped through the wreckage, smiling gently, too gently. "Rowan," he said, "you look tired." Rowan snarled. "Stay away from her." Adrian looked past Rowan at Grace. "Hello, little light." Grace's stomach twisted. "Don't call me that." Adrian laughed softly. "You burned my storm. That was adorable." Rowan lunged first. Power cracked through the air, frost swirling like a blizzard around his arms. He slammed into Adrian with a blast of icy force strong enough to crack the floor. Adrian barely moved. He caught Rowan by the throat. Grace gasped. "Rowan!" Adrian lifted him effortlessly. "You were always weaker." Rowan choked out, "Let her go." "Why?" Adrian asked calmly. "She is the only thing I want." Grace grabbed a fallen torch, even though it was useless against someone like Adrian. Adrian flicked his finger. The torch shattered in her hand. Grace stumbled back. Adrian smirked. "You burn bright, little human. Too bright." He dropped Rowan to the floor. Rowan coughed violently, struggling to rise. Adrian walked toward Grace slowly. Grace backed away. "Rowan!" Rowan forced himself up, blood dripping from his lip. "Adrian!" he roared. Adrian turned his head slightly. Rowan unleashed his strongest blast yet, blue flames of frozen power. Adrian raised a single hand. The flames froze in midair. Grace's heart stopped. Adrian whispered, "You cannot win." Rowan whispered back, "I don't need to." He looked at Grace, and Grace understood. The light. Her light. Grace stepped forward, hands shaking, but not with fear, this time with something stronger. She faced Adrian. "You want my light? Then take it." Adrian paused. Rowan gasped, "Grace, no." Grace lifted her glowing hands. Adrian reached for her. At the moment his fingertips touched Grace's light, a blinding explosion tore through the hall. Adrian screamed. Not in pain. In rage. In fear. The light shot through him, ripping apart the shadows in his body like threads torn from cloth. His face twisted violently. Grace stumbled backward, collapsing. Rowan caught her before she hit the ground. The light faded. Adrian stood trembling, cracks of white light spreading across his body like broken glass. Rowan held Grace close, whispering her name. Adrian stared at his hands in horror. "What have you done?" Rowan stood, eyes glowing bright crimson. "You woke the one thing you cannot consume," Rowan said. "A human heart." Adrian roared, voice full of wrath. The palace shook, but his body was crumbling, light spilling from every crack. "You cannot stop me," Adrian screamed. His body shattered into a storm of black dust. Then silence. Cold. Heavy. Complete. Grace gasped for air, trembling. Rowan fell to his knees, holding her tightly. "It's over," he whispered. "Grace, it's over." Grace's fingers curled weakly into his cloak. "Rowan," she whispered, voice trembling. He leaned closer. "Yes." Her voice barely formed. "Don't let go." Rowan held her as the golden star in the heart of winter glowed faintly in the distance. And for the first time in decades, the palace did not feel cold. If you felt the chill, the danger, and the magic of this world, don't leave the story here. Hit like to keep the fire burning. Subscribe so you never miss the next chapter. And comment below what moment shook you the most. Because your reactions bring these stories to life. Turn on notifications so you're the first to witness what happens next in this dark, enchanted kingdom. Your support keeps the story alive. Until the next chapter, stay curious, stay brave, and keep the light glowing.